AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Gary, what up?
How are you, John?
Doing pretty good.
So your guy did not win the Indianapolis 500, as we discussed last week.
No, that's right. That's right. I thought Alex Palou might win it because I think he's on a hot streak. I think he'll still win the championship. But Joseph Newgarden did himself a world of good by winning that race.
19th for Roger Penske. You know, I was watching that race, and
I know it was 20.
Yeah.
Was it 20?
20th, yeah.
Wow.
20
I kept
wins
saying
for
19
Roger
last
at the Brookyard.
So I thought a lot of cars went out during the race. It seemed extraordinary to me. And so I looked back the last 5 years to see how things were. So 10 cars were out of the race. 21 finished 200 laps, right? So looking back, last year, 12 cars were out. The year before that, only 6 cars were out. And in 2021, only 3 cars were out of the race. So what do you think's going on? I mean, is it the drivers are going so much faster that it's more difficult for them, or?
It's up and down. It always varies. I want to say there were 3 blown engines. I think Honda lost 3 cars that way. I didn't see the whole race, unfortunately. I was actually racing myself up at Waterford Hills, but there can be accidents that take out cars as well. That's why they race. You never know what's going to happen.
But I know it's going to happen now. We're going to have a great show.
Yes, we are. That's right. So tell the audience who we've got here.
So we have Barry Caldwell, who is Transportation and Mobility Industry Business Value Consultant. You must have a tremendously long business card.
My cards are way big.
At Dassault Systèmes, which is well, you explain what Dassault is because I will truncate it and not get its full flavor.
Oh, certainly. Just so Dassault Systems, I'd like to start off with kind of our mission statement, right? We make really cool software, and the purpose of that software is to allow people and businesses to create 3D experience universes, right, where they can imagine sustainable kind of innovations that are capable of harmonizing nature, product, and life.
Okay,
right?
let me translate that. They
Really
make the
stuff.
coolest simulation software that simulates not just the mechanical world, but the real world as well.
Right.
And you can play out all different kinds of scenarios in that software to get to the best design solution, which is why we've got you on the show today, because we want to talk about that.
And with that, we have the concept of the virtual twin, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And we service not only transportation, as we're here today to talk about, but many, many other industries, life sciences, aerospace, consumer products, industrial products.
We don't care about
Quite a
any of
broad
those
thing.
things.
Yeah.
And we have our friend Brett Smith back.
Gary,
Brett, how are you?
I'm well. Gary, it's good to see you. 2 things. First, John, Gary, it's so good to be back in this room. You know, for 4 years, I kept nagging you guys, you got to get back. You got to get back.
You wanted us in the studio because we
I
were
love
doing
it.
things virtually because of COVID, but
Yep.
we followed your advice.
Oh, absolutely. The second is Pato Award was a fabulous race, driver in that race.
Right.
He did a fabulous job. And the passion at the end of the race, watching him so dejected, so frustrated. Newgarden happy, but the reason you race is that frustration. You know, I've got to come back. I've got to do better the next time. I was so close.
Yeah, he was so close. He came in second place, which most drivers in the field would have killed for to finish second. And here he's, dejected that he only came in second. I like to say, second place is just the first loser.
So Barry, in your career, you spent some 32 years at Ford. You worked at Rivian. So during these periods of time, you were using this type of software that you've described to us. Tell us what product development is like in the real world, unlike the theoretical world that the three of us talk about.
Well, product development is certainly very complex, right? And it's gotten more and more complex as time goes on. Look back in the day, if you will, we were ecstatic when we could get physical hardware together and put it into a prototype and go drive it around or do it and, yay, success, right? We got the car to go and everything's awesome, right? And as we kind of come into this world, this time frame, We've moved away from the physical. We've moved more into the virtual. We've moved away from being very hardware focused now to being hardware and software focused. We've moved away from saying, well, this is the product, I hope somebody buys it, to really knowing the customer, really knowing the markets, really knowing those offerings, and being very, very precise. A while ago, maybe we'd look at 100 or 2,000 attributes, right? Now, if you look at product development, it looks at thousands, tens of thousands of attributes, and just really goes to make sure you optimize every one of those things to your targeted customers, right? And the level of sophistication of the product today, and what you have to do within that product development is just exponentially higher. You can look at a vehicle, let's pick on the Rivian just as an example, right? An incredible vehicle, right? If you've ever been behind the wheel of one of these things, it can go really, really fast, and you take it out off-road and it's incredibly capable. How did that get to be? How did you do that? Because it wasn't just the hardware. There's a ton of software associated with that. And those systems have to interoperate. They have to talk together, right? Are you on the road and you want to be more road specific in your driving? Or are you off the road and you want to be more off-road capable specific? And that's really transformed the way that we look at product development, right? We just have to look at that as a very holistic unification of everything that we do in the digital software space, the human interface to the vehicle, and then how that vehicle reacts within its environment.
Barry, right now, as you know, everybody outside of China is deeply concerned about how the Chinese automakers are coming on. Great product, good-looking product, well-made product, far less costly than anything coming out of the US, Europe, Japan, or South Korea. You've got to have the tools, I believe, that are going to help automakers take cost out. Can you talk a little bit about that? What has all the simulation done in terms of reducing product development time, getting the iterations that nail it in terms of what the customer wants, all those things? And I'd like to get your opinion. Can the legacy non-Chinese companies compete with these Chinese startups and even the Chinese legacies?
Big question, huge question. But maybe just to get perspective on this, certainly what we offer as a solution has really developed to be very holistic across the entire space. It's not just the digital representation of a vehicle, it's the simulation, as you stated, right? How do these parts in isolation, how do these parts together, how do these parts with software all react? We can do all that digitally simulated. And we can democratize that information so that every discipline, every role that needs to be a part of that, whether they're deep into design or analysis or dynamics, or they're maybe on the periphery of how we're going to source these things, right? Everybody gets a view of that data and can collaborate in that data and communicate. You can think about it as a social platform in many respects because we have conversations and program management and all kinds of notifications and all kinds of cool things. I can pull it up on my phone and look at designs. Really enables that kind of expedited design with quality, with speed, with continuity, and learning from all of that data, right? All that data is there, we can do it. So we kind of really provide that. So when you look at a company, a startup company, as for instance, and they use our application, yeah, they get a huge jump start because we also have solutions. We also help them. Here's some best practices on how you go about developing a vehicle, simulating a vehicle, releasing a vehicle, manufacturing a vehicle. So we get a lot of that relative to the traditional OEMs versus the Chinese startups. Certainly, the capabilities are here. Our software development knowledge in the States is incredible. Our legacy of hardware and what the driving experience is and all that, yeah, that's all there. It's interesting because a lot of these companies that you're speaking of come from that kind of more software perspective, right? And that's something that you could maybe say the legacy companies States came from more of a hardware perspective, but they're quickly catching up. And if you look at some of the vehicles that are being released in the States today, they're incredibly competitive against that. Cost, different story. You know, I don't want to go into the details of that, but that's a factor. But I think from a technological standpoint, absolutely.
So if we think about like the most famous startup, which would, in the US anyway, would certainly be Tesla, and you know the whole Silicon Valley phenomenon of vehicle development. And you know, you mentioned your experience at Rivian. Is there a greater willingness for startup companies, for a Rivian, for a Tesla, for a Lucid, for whatever, to embrace the tools versus having a mindset of gee, we did it this way for the last 40 years and we'll do it this way for the next 40 years?
It's a very good observation. Some of the startup companies, some of these companies, first of all, they have no legacy, right? They don't have any legacy. But what they do have is that innovative spirit, that drive to do something different, right? And they come from that foundation, and they come from a modern mindset of, the car is not just a car. The car is a part of your life. It's an integral thing of what you do. And we have to be thinking from a startup standpoint. We just can't make another legacy car. Well, that's not going to get anybody very interested in it, right? We've got to think differently. We've got to think more about what is this? How will it fit in our lifestyle? What will we innovate to be different, right? So I'll just use simple examples, right? Tesla. What about the air registers? Where are they? Do you go down and grab them anywhere? No, you don't, right? Do you even know where they are? You don't, right? You go to the screen, you press some buttons, and it directs the air, it gives you the heat. You don't know really where it's coming from. It's somewhere in here, right? That's a different thinking. Mega castings, right? Why do I have hundreds of parts to do an underbody? Can I do it in one part? Can I do it in 4 parts? It's that kind of thinking that these companies really bring the spirit forward and bring the innovations to drive product excellence and things that customers will look at and go, wow, that's really cool, right? It's not just another car like I've seen before. It's different. It even drives different, it even feels different, it interacts different. These are what I think is transformational with the startup type companies. And certainly the OEMs have gotten it, right? They understand that's the differentiators that they now do need to be part of also.
If I could build on what Gary's talking about for a moment and step back, one of the big opportunities for digital is to get rid of the prototype, to get rid of the hardware. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago versus now. How is that prototyping, building a piece to check on it, evolved given the digital?
Oh, it's involved dramatically. I can reference back, many, many years. We would manage entire fleets of prototypes. I mean, hundreds of prototypes, right? Because you want, okay, well, we had a new one in that configuration. We need one in this configuration. We need one in that configuration, right? We've got to go with all these. And it was challenging, and it was expensive, and it was slow, right? You have to make these parts. You got to assemble these vehicles. Transfer yourself to today, where you do that digitally, right? You do those things, and you get really smart because you've got that intelligence. You've got those digital things to say, you know what? We only need to make that one, and that one. We just need 3 of them. That's all we need to go into physical form to solve regulatory compliance, any testing that we want to do, because we've done all the rest digitally and we've confirmed it digitally and we have confidence in it.
So world-class globally, how many prototypes for a new vehicle program?
Depending on scale, certainly sub 50. And some of those may be...
How many 10 years ago?
Oh, hundreds. Yeah, absolutely.
So is the sub 50 for a Ford or for a Rivian or for both?
I won't want to speak for Ford or Rivian necessarily, but certainly, yeah, you would look at all companies do that. As you can understand, prototypes are really expensive, and the money is one thing. That's okay, right? Time is the killer, right? I've got to fabricate parts. Some of those parts may be very complex in how they're fabricated, take time. I've got to get all those parts in one place. I've got to assemble those into that. I've got to validate it, right? Time is the killer there, right? It just takes so much time to put some of those together and then run. You got to run it. Now that you've done it, you've got to run it. You do that digitally, you can run it overnight, literally in many places. So I think everyone is to that point of, we need to reduce prototypes. We need to do more of this in the digital space. We need to wring out every optimization that we possibly can before we go to a physical part, to a physical vehicle.
So do you think we'll get to 0 prototypes?
If you ask me, I personally think it's possible. I've, from personal experience, many times where we just said, yeah, okay, well, we've got to make a physical, right? We feel really, really confident in what we've done simulation data-wise, but certainly just to feel really good about it, yeah, let's go and make some physical vehicles. And plus, you want to drive it. I mean, you've worked on it for that long. You want to have a vehicle that you can go out and say, let's figure out how to break it.
John, our good friend Dave Cole, 30 years ago, as Silicon Graphics was just getting into this and they were creating this digitalization, talked about the first vehicle off the line being no prototypes saleable. And our response was, Dave, you drive that one. We won't take that one. There's a lot of learning in those prototypes, but you're getting that knowledge earlier and better now.
Certainly, yes. And maybe to separate a little bit, prototypes in the development space, right? Those are things that you're doing to confirm that your design is really good, right? And a lot of that we can do digitally. Early runs, prototypes, quote unquote, early builds in the physical space, you're really kind of making sure that all of these massive dynamics that come together to get a vehicle off the assembly line is repeatable with quality, right? So those are very important, and those are things that all the automotives look at very critically. How did that vehicle come off the line? Did it meet our digital? Did it meet what we thought it was? Does it have the quality? Is it fit and finish there, right? Can we just say off a line, ship, right? Or do we have to say off a line, oh, got to go over here and fix that and the other thing? And that's really what we're kind of embracing now, is like kind of the next frontier, is how do you get that confidence in your manufacturing repeatability that those vehicles will be good, so you can have first vehicle offline saleable.
So Dassault makes systems. You can design it, you can engineer it, you can manufacture it, you can test it, you can design the factory, you can put the people in there working, on and on and on. Okay. Detroit is desperate to get people to come who have software and technical skills. Is the auto industry sufficiently staffed to be able to take advantage of all of this technology that companies like because there are other companies that offer this, so it's not just you guys, but so there seems to me to be, a huge need of technical smarts to be able to execute.
I have to answer that kind of conditionally, right? And the reason I say conditionally is certainly that expertise is needed, right? That is something you'll see when we go from traditional ICE engine, petrol engines to drive units, right? It's a whole different discipline, right? It's electronic-based stuff. It's not combustion-based stuff. So there's some technical challenges there. Software, certainly some technical challenges, but think about it a little bit this way, and maybe for all the wrong reasons with COVID, we don't have to be physically in the same place. We have a digital model. We have a virtual twin. If the expertise is somewhere else on the earth, let's maybe go to where the expertise is. We can certainly assemble the vehicle digitally. We can get all that stuff. We can share that thing. Time's not the same everywhere, so that's a little bit of a challenge. But I think we don't have to push everybody to Detroit as much as we'd love them to come here. We can certainly go to the West Coast and get great expertise in that. We can go to other parts of the world and get that. So I don't think it's as much of an issue. Certainly identifying the right people and facilitating so that they can work effectively in teams, yeah, that's a little bit of a challenge, but I don't see it so much as a challenge anymore.
Where does the industry stand now in terms of product development? Traditionally, throughout most of my career, it was usually described as a 4-year process. And it depends when you measure, right? But from clay freeze to job one was usually 4 years. Where does that stand now?
There's lots of opinions, lots of perspectives, lots on that, but certainly it's not 4 years. That's for sure.
A lot less.
It's a lot less. I would say, just my thumbing it, you're kind of in the 2-year time frame now.
24 months.
24 months is certainly a pretty good.
So this technology is taken
now.
about 2 years out of the process,
yeah,
which is amazing.
When you, again, just that prototype thing, as for instance, right? That was, that could be a 3 or 6 month or 8 month sort of dance, right? It's just, okay, well, parts are coming, let's get going, right? That was a big deal. That was on the critical path, right? You kind of look at that critical path of development now, and some of those big tasks of simulation. Oh, it used to take us 6 weeks to run a simulation run, 6 hours, right? It's not, compute power doubles every 3 months, give or take, right? It's really compressed those things down, and we've gotten a lot smarter in how we go about doing our products. It's not always start from ground zero and work up. You're starting from a lot of known knowledge, a lot of capabilities, a lot of known how we're going to execute this particular system, how we're going to do this platform. You look at many of the companies today, they'll have platforms, right? You want to do a platform? Okay, we're going to do a pickup off of that. We're going to do an SUV off of that. We're going to do a sedan off of that. We're going to do a coupe off of that. Yeah, we've got to play with some parameters on these things, but it's fundamentally there, right? So I'm not building a new platform for every vehicle.
Okay,
I'm
so if you
leveraging
got a
it.
platform and all you're going to do is change the top hat, how short a period of time could you do that?
Very
in?
quick. I'm not the expert on this, but I would say, if you're taking 12 months, you're probably getting pretty slow at it, because you can define these things along with all their attributes parametrically. When I use that word, right, they're variable. We can play with them, and they have bounds, right? You can only go so big and so wide. But you can do that. You can get your first vehicle off of it and say, okay, now let's have a derivative vehicle off of that. Yeah, okay, we can get it fundamentally done in 12 months. Maybe we got to spend some more time to know the market, but engineering-wise, yeah.
So meaning you have the data exists. When you say platform, I sometimes think of like a physical structure, but what you're saying is that you've got this digital model that exists, and someone just needs to select that and then play with it in terms of what they need to get in terms of the size.
Just interesting thing on that, maybe just ask you guys, how much data do you think we're making out there? How quickly do you think we're making data? Like how fast is, like, if I said, how long does it take us to get twice as much data as we have today? How long would you think it would take to do that?
Yeah, very quickly is my guess. That's
quickly.
about as precise as I can get.
The
Tell 'em,
amount
Brett.
the amount of data that we're generating and we're codifying and we're collecting, it just, again, it's like compute power. It exponentiates. It doubles very frequently. Okay.
So two questions. One, that 12-month turnaround. How does the supply base react to that? Because there's making the equipment, making those things, then producing the parts. So it seems like 12 months is a really quick turnaround for any supplier.
Right. So I want to separate a little bit. There's the design and then there's the realization, right? So when you say, hey, let's go design a derivative off of a vehicle. Okay, that's design work. That's a relatively small group of people doing that work. Then we get to the next phase. You're saying, okay, now we got to incorporate, how are we going to source this thing? How are we going to do it? Then we've got to bring in our supply bases. Sometimes they're in early. Sometimes they're an integral part of the design work. Sometimes it's, you know what, we're going to go out and bid this. We're going to go figure out how to do this. Certainly, they're fast. They use the same technologies a lot of the OEMs use. So they're typically pretty fast, but that will add time, obviously. That could add another 12 months for sure to get through all of the commercial agreements, the sourcing agreements.
But ideally,
agreements,
if you did it right, you'd have your supply base as part of the design process.
Yeah,
and do it all in 12 months.
It's an interesting topic, right? Because when you think about, maybe let's get into battery technology, as a for instance, and it harkens back to the back day. Am I going to do my own battery technology? Am I going to buy my battery technology? Right?
I understand with that, because
right?
that's all new to most OEMs, right? All this battery chemistry stuff. But bodies, they know bodies. They've been doing that for a century.
Yeah, a body shop, a body development, certainly, your suppliers, who you're going to pull things through. Same thing with, HVACs, not transmissions, but drive units, interior components. Yeah, you've got your supply chain. You've got your folks that you're intimate with. Some you're really intimate with. They're maybe even serving in the role as an engineer for you. Others, you're going to go down the list of things and you're going to pick that one and maybe tweak it a little bit for your application.
Moreover, if you're doing, what most of the industry calls digital twins, but you guys call virtual twins, and explain that difference. But again, the supplier can be right there, part of the process, seeing everything that's going on.
Absolutely, they are in many cases, right? Let's see the easiest way to explain this. A digital twin, maybe confining it, is a digital representation of a physical thing, right? I've gone from drawing this thing on paper to codifying it in a computer, and I can look at it on the screen and say, yeah, it looks a lot like a car. This is good. This is a great thing, and this is what we did in the 80s and 90s, maybe. Virtual twin. Well, virtual kind of means everything, right? It's not just the geometrical representation. It's all that metadata, all that analysis, all that smarts that you identify with that thing. How is that body going to react? What are the simulations that are done? Who are we sourcing it from? What is it going to be made out of? How do we address recycling? It brings in all that additional information so that we can understand virtually the entire product from its inception to its end of life.
So you mentioned suppliers can get the software tools that you guys provide. Do you help make supply chains more robust in any way? Is it possible?
Absolutely, yeah. What you'll see, and it ever evolves, right? These are ever evolving things. Sometimes OEMs really like their suppliers. Sometimes they don't like their suppliers. It kind of depends on the business situation. But certainly the tools that we offer are tools that are supply-based, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Even a mom and pop shop can have our tools. We have a wide plethora of applications. And we provide a social context in which all of these activities can interrelate and work together, right? We have data intelligence tools to say, hey, I want to get a fog lamp. What are all the fog lamps that are out there? Yeah, we've got an application that'll go out and find every bloody fog lamp they have and put it in the context of your vehicle and let you know what it is. So you can pick and choose your suppliers. It can be a portal to let suppliers communicate to you what is new in their world. What have we got being developed that you might be of interest in your application? Very collaborative tools, very easy to understand, very standardized in terms of how they share data and this metadata. So it really helps in expediting your development process. It's not a wait and see, it's immediate. The data's there, you get it, you put it in context of the vehicle, you understand all the parameters associated with it, and you can really make some intelligent decisions around the design, the costs, the sourcing, the availability, all these kind of things.
Very interesting. So you deal with all the automakers in the world, I imagine. Or a lot of them, I should say.
I would say we deal with quite a few of them.
And the supply base is on board too?
Absolutely. So many of the tier 1s, tier 2s will use our tools. Again, remember, they service a lot of companies, so they may have more than our tools, fair enough. But our tool is really good because our tool can consume a lot of different data from a lot of different sources and codify, we call it a unified data model, bring all that data into a very easy environment so that many people can look at it from many different perspectives. Just as a simple example, you're developing a new system, a new part, right? The engineer is intimate with it. He or she is doing the design work, doing the analysis work, and doing all that. And that's important for their job. But they may be working with a buyer who's going to be the one that's going to help them source that, right? The buyer has a role and a discipline where they work on their kinds of things, but they need to know about your design, right? In our environment, it's very easy, right? They get identified, they can tag that design, they can see it on their screen in a very simple interface. They don't need to know all the details of it, but they need to see the part. They need to know what it looks like. They need to know what it's made out of or what it wants to be made out of. They need to know how it's going to be assembled. These things can all be presented in a very simple and easy way for them to communicate within their role. And then they can pitch into to say, hey, you know what? I've got another supplier out there who's got a very similar design to what you're doing. So the data intelligence told me this. Maybe you should consider this. Take a look at it, right? And that's a very powerful thing, right? Because it democratizes that information and makes it really accessible for a lot of different roles, a lot of different disciplines to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at US, Asia, and Europe, is one region further ahead in its implementation of these types of digital tools, or is it fairly even across the board?
Yeah, good question.
Wow, that's a great question. Further ahead, I don't think anybody's really further ahead. I think some folks are more aggressive necessarily, than others. But in terms of the expertise and knowledge and the capability of leveraging these tools, it's a little bit of a leapfrog that goes on. Some have adopted them more wholeheartedly. Some have adopted part of them. Some haven't adopted them at all necessarily because they have certain ways that they want to do things that don't necessarily leverage these kind of capabilities. But I would say kind of maybe in a more generic sense, you can certainly look at some of these young companies that really jump into this stuff, right? Because they have to. They can't build their own system from 30 years ago. They can't do that. They need to start with a very capable solution. And they're typically very open to this and very open to learning and taking advantage of everything that has to offer.
So to that point real quick, can you tell by looking at a project what type of company did it? A startup or a traditional?
I can certainly. I can certainly see the difference in how it's executed, what it's showing, and you have to contextualize that, right? Startups are very aggressive. They need to get a product out there that's going to mean something to you as a customer, right? Maybe they're not so cost focused, right? Because if you can't get something out there that people are going to want, well, then you're, oh well, right? Where a traditional OEM may be a little more cost conscious in what they do, and they'll make those decisions. So maybe their interior trim isn't as fancy on the vehicle, right? Or maybe the back part of the interior trim's not so fancy, where a startup would say, well, we need to make the whole thing fancy because we want people to embrace this product and really love it. Then we'll work on the cost issue.
Real good. Barry, we're at the half-hour mark. I want to thank you for coming on the show.
thank you,
Very
guys.
interesting. We've seen some of this technology in action. It's amazing. It's the way forward for the industry.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure being here.
Very cool.
And
Thank you.
Just so everybody knows, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. We're going to swap out Barry. We've got Tu Lee coming on the set from Sino Auto Insights. We're going to be talking a lot about what he saw in China. We'll be back in just a moment.
Keeping your heart racing in and out of the gym. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Potenza Sport AS tires with a 50,000-mile limited warranty.
All right, we're back. We're still switching microphones here, but Tu, great to have you back on the show.
He's not on yet.
Oh, what? Okay, Tu, great to have you back on the show. He said again to make sure that the mic's on.
John, thanks for having me. Gary,
Yeah.
good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So you were in China recently. You just got back fairly recently, right? And tell us about what you saw, because, everybody here in Detroit's got their hair on fire. All these very inexpensive, I'm not going to call them cheap, I'm going to say very inexpensive Chinese cars. And Detroit, and this is true in Europe and Japan and South, everyone's trying to figure out, how do we compete with this?
So I spent about 3.5 weeks in China, got back about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and was there for the auto show, but did a lot of visits and tested out a lot of technology. And comparing contrast from Shanghai, the Legacy showed up. Volkswagen had a big booth right next to their Chinese partner, XPeng. And GM launched a few vehicles. Cadillac launched the Optic. So it's going to be available first in China, I believe, and then in the rest of the world. Chevy also launched a couple PHEVs that I think are going to get them into the game. Ford was largely absent. Tesla was absent as well. Stellantis, they were looking, and more recently had some announcements with partnerships with their partner, Leap Motor. And so I think, we had talked about this off camera, there's going to be Chinese IP in European branded vehicles that sell in Europe probably within the next 24, 30 months.
So explain that a little bit. So you say IP, intellectual property. I mean, isn't it going to be more than that? I mean, isn't it going to be like physical product that will be part of the product that Stellantis offers, let's say?
Sure. So I'm looking at IP or intellectual property in the broadest sense, like Barry had kind of been talking about software. And with Leap Motor in particular, there's the extended range electric vehicle technology that they use. So it's not hybrid because the gas engine repowers or regenerates power to the battery as opposed to driving the wheels. But Leap Motor specializes in vehicles that are less than $20,000 US. And so Stellantis had created a joint venture, sales and marketing joint venture, in order to import Leap Motor vehicles, Leap Motor branded vehicles into Europe. Now, that goes up against the June 10th date where the European Union is supposed to announce whether or not there's going to be an increase in the tariff from Chinese imported vehicles.
What do you think is going to happen? Are they going to raise the tariff or no?
Yeah, I do. I
do
do
too.
think, but it's not going to be anywhere near the 100%.
No, it's going to be 30%, 25 to 30%.
I think 30 is going to cap.
Yeah.
Because if you look at if there's going to be retaliation and who has the most exposure to China on the European side, is the German automakers. And so you did have Tavares, or Carlos Tavares, the global CEO of Stellantis, about 15 months ago talking, we need protection, we need protection. And he has this transaction. Now he's like, we want free markets.
Yeah.
We want free markets, because I think an important distinction between this Yellen and von der Leyen overcapacity, cheap Chinese vehicle kind of debate is that all automakers are using China as a manufacturing hub now and are going to export out. GM currently does it. Nissan's talked about it. Stellantis obviously is going to do it. Volkswagen Group, and even Mercedes is also talking about free markets as well. And so this should kind of validate China as a quality and a reliability, like their products are high quality, high reliability. I'm driving a Chinese-built Buick Envision right now, and so that is so. So it's not just Chinese branded vehicles that are going to be exported. Tesla was the #1 exporter for EVs out of China last year, and so that needs to be a broader topic of conversations in the future, so we can kind of create some nuance, right? The United States, of course, with their 100% tariff, means that, yeah, not many cars are going to be exported. I think last year there was only 2% anyway.
Not from China, but Chinese cars could come from Thailand or
Yes.
Mexico or
Or
Poland
Korea.
or Korea.
Korea.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I want to get your sense of the price war going on there. What was the vibe that you were getting? Because based on what I've read, there's only 3 Chinese car companies or 3 companies in China making a profit on electric cars: BYD, Tesla, and Li Auto.
So a bit of context. About 90% of all cars are priced below 30,000 US dollars. The ones, so 90% of our cars sold in 2023 were priced below $30,000. And so that part of the market is where the bulk of the brands are selling. Okay. And so
just to get some clarity here. So when we hear that number, and given that the average transaction price here is like 48, right? Okay, is $30,000, if you translate that into what we're used to, I mean, is that an inexpensive vehicle for the Chinese market, or is that what the Chinese market absorbs in a robust way?
30,000 is pretty expensive for the average Chinese consumer,
Okay.
especially in the lower tier cities. And so but using the 80-20 rule, that's probably where it tops out at, generally speaking. And then if you look at BYD, at least on the NEV side, the new energy vehicle side, if we include hybrids, they're 3 million units of an 8 million unit market last year. Okay, and a small percentage of that was exported, but for the most part, that 3 million units was sold domestically. About 60-40 split between battery electric and plug-in hybrids. But we just saw this week that they launched a new hybrid technology that's going into small sedans that, to your point, John, are going to be priced around 13,000 US dollars. Now, again, a little bit more context. They're about 5 times the size of the United States. So anytime we talk about economies of scale, we're talking if we buy 1, they buy 5, right, or 4.5. Okay, so overcapacity aside, they're always likely going to be cheaper than everybody else in the neighborhood that wants to build something that they're already building.
But how sustainable is it if only 3 of these automakers are making a profit on electric cars?
It's not. And so the dance between foreign legacy and Chinese local domestic player is probably going to increase significantly depending on what happens in January 2025 in the United States. Because
you mean new president, or
yes,
maybe
new president? Yes,
yeah.
Because assuming that Biden stays, the policies will likely remain in place. But Trump is a little bit more unpredictable. And the companies that I spoke with while I was in China, their biggest headache or anxiety is created by the uncertainty, right? If we know it's 100%, now we can create a strategy either around it or we can bypass it and focus on other markets. But the fact that the EU, we don't know yet, I think that creates a bit of anxiety, and it doesn't allow them to finalize strategies. But to your point, John, there are still dozens of brands. A lot of them are being rolled out by SOEs or state-owned enterprises. And so a lot of those companies and brands we'll never see here anyways. But there should be, let's say by 25, 26, a much smaller crop of brands that might have some viability in Europe. And they're going to have a ton of viability in Latin America, South America, Southeast Asia, where price points per capita incomes are much lower and price points need to be a lot lower. So a lot of those cars, they probably wouldn't be road legal in the United States anyways.
There's so much focus on the EVs coming out of China. Is there another concern of the ICEs coming out of China for those other markets?
That should be actually the most immediate concern, and not for the United States, but because 80% of all the vehicles, or higher than 80% of all the vehicles that were shipped or exported from China were ICE vehicles. Now, a lot of that was taken by Russia, Latin America, because there's 10, 12, 14 brands now shipping to Mexico as an entry point.
If I'm a company that makes a lot of vehicles for those markets, I think that's a huge risk going forward, isn't it? If I'm a non-Chinese company that serves those markets and has for decades, all of a sudden you have a new competitor coming in that could drastically change that very simplistic model.
But here's a statistic for you. Volkswagen Group and General Motors in China lost about 4 million units of capacity or sales total
over the last
6 or 7 years.
No,
so some of that overcapacity is foreign automakers, right? So,
but I'm talking about Chinese companies serving those other markets outside the developing market.
So if you're
what you're-
Nissan selling in Mexico, that suddenly you've got competition from these Chinese
or think
companies.
of all of Southeast Asia, where you've got
South America, Africa, it's the whole world.
where it's all these companies that for decades have made good money in volume there.
right. And
They're going to lose it.
well, but this is also the conundrum for China, right? Because we're almost at a 50% take rate on EVs, and so it's actually getting very unattractive to build ICEs in
Except
China.
for, look at the news that came out this week, which blew my mind. It was BYD and Geely both came out with new generation ICE engines with 46% thermal efficiency. The best in the world.
And
Better than
remember-
Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, which had been claiming high thermal efficiency.
Remember when we were told that the Chinese would never catch up in ICE engines?
That's right. And that's why they had to leapfrog. Well, guess what? They're doing ICE as well.
in the misnomer, I think, and it's okay for a lot of the West to think that Toyota has the best hybrid technology, but they don't. It's BYD, because and for the folks in the West that still think BYD builds these crappy vehicles, Toyota outsources to BYD on vehicles in the China market. And so if Toyota trusts them to build cars with the Toyota brand on it, I think that should kind of put to bed any thoughts about BYD building substandard vehicles or not up to world-class
Well,
quality.
I can tell you, nobody that I know of in the automotive industry, including here in Detroit, thinks that BYD is some cheap Chinese little company.
They were, but
They were, but not anymore.
yeah.
I'm putting together my industry report card. BYD just broke into the top 10 of automakers globally.
Yep.
On a volume basis and pushed Mercedes-Benz off the list. So that just shows you. And I mean, from an operating profit standpoint, they were even Steven with Ford. Ford had a bad year last year, so I'll cut them some slack. But BYD's a real player, and people, I can assure you, people in the industry, especially in this town, are hyper aware of that.
In BYD and a couple of other brands, notable brands, and large companies are actually moving to the premium segment because BYD launched 2 new brands. And so we should also start looking at the premium side because ABB or Audi Beamer Benz has dominated that traditionally in China for 40 years. Now they're still selling a decent number of ICEs in the China market, but Lotus is out now, the Zeekr is out now, Polestar, Volvo, and so that's going to really push into the premium side. And we saw that last year. Porsche globally grew by 3%, but that's despite losing 15% sales.
25%.
Or 25%.
25. I was stunned when I saw that. I mean, Porsche, that's a premium brand. You're not buying it just for the mechanical capabilities. It's because it's a bloody Porsche, right? And so what that showed me is the Chinese are coming on so strong right now, at least in the Chinese market, that heritage of your brand, maybe they don't, the consumer, especially the young consumer, doesn't care.
Yep. In China, there's no sacred cows when it comes to these brands, for sure.
So let me ask you, okay, how is it that these Chinese brands have been able to become so successful in a rather short order? Is it basically industrial policy from the Chinese government that is providing them with sufficient support and other incentives that allows them to develop these products?
So back to John's point, there's only 3 companies that are profitable. So I don't know if I would call them successful yet. But we also need to look at Tesla and how long it took them to be profitable, because they are the prime example of a startup in the automotive space, an EV startup in particular, that needed subsidies from the United States, from China, in order to get to this profitability level. And they're a 21-year-old company. So for the most part, most of their existence, they haven't been profitable. Okay, at least not until the 3 and the Y were launched specifically. And so if we look at Lucid, we look at Rivian, they have these halo vehicles that no one can afford, or mostly no one can afford. And so maybe we give them an opportunity to get to a level where they're building a 3 or a Y equivalent of their brand in order to judge them. Now, do they have enough runway from a capital standpoint? Rivian, Lucid, probably, but everybody else, I don't know. And in China, the same thing, right? The SOEs are a little bit different because they're a bit of a hybrid, but I think they're also looking to IPO in Hong Kong or Shenzhen, or Zeekr IPO'd 2 weeks ago in the United States
On the NYSE, right?
So I mean, they were oversubscribed on their IPO, so they did pretty well for themselves.
Well, what I'm wondering about is that, if we look at the IRA in the United States, I mean, people are saying, okay, that's industrial policy, that we are, subsidizing auto companies to build electric vehicles, so we will not lose that technology. Okay, and some say, well, you shouldn't do that, which goes to the tariff situation. I mean, should we have 100% tariffs on Chinese cars? And it just seems to me that there has to be something that is allowing at least these 3 companies in China to do what they're doing, that they're not magicians, right? I mean, they're just like engineers in Detroit or engineers in Stuttgart or engineers in Toyota City. I mean, they're all pretty much the same. And I'm just wondering what has allowed this to happen.
Well, I can interject one thing.
Sure.
Scale. I mean, we're talking
Yeah,
about the 3 highest sellers of EVs by far. I mean, you go BYD, Tesla, Li Auto, and Li Auto is all E-revs, right? It's
Yep.
not even pure BEVs. And then there's still a list of companies, but their sales are significantly lower.
Right, but you make a lot of them, and they're not good. I mean, you were just talking about the thermal efficiency of these ICE engines, right? Okay, so let's say they made engines that had like virtually no thermal efficiency. I don't care how many you make, you're still not going to be successful, right?
Right.
So what is behind the ability to become so successful?
I was in Beijing in 2018, before the pandemic, so it's been a while. But at the Beijing show, the cars were terrible. They are not now. They're fabulous in many ways now.
World class.
How did, in that short period of time, how did they go from, not every one of them, obviously, but many of them go from building stuff that isn't fabulous to stuff that is fabulous? And oh, by the way, doing it with a whole lot of IT on the inside for the driver.
So I think it was Brett or Barry.
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 Yeah.
So I was told 14 months from clean sheet to job one now in China, new products. And so, you know, Brett talked about,
Barry.
or Barry
Barry.
talked about being able to utilize these tools. I'm not concerned about the United States being able to utilize the Dassault system tools in order to increase the speed of development. To me, it's a culture issue, right? Can the foreign legacies change the culture in order to move faster, right? Because we have the tools, we have the capabilities. If we assume that, can the mind that has been used to for 30, 40 years get to the point where, you know what, it was a 4-year process, but can I get my mind around, I don't trust this virtual validation of this part or this system. I still need to see it physically, right? That's a culture thing. And can the US3 leadership change the culture so quickly?
Back
So,
to the point, you can do it fast, but really bad. How do you do it fast and good?
and you make a great point, Brett, because the one misnomer is that if we do it faster, we'll have quality issues, right? Because those things shouldn't be mutually exclusive. We can't do it faster and build the quality levels that we need to, because it's happening in China, at least from what I've seen. Because one of the things that I did was drive an Xpeng. It was their Halo vehicle, a 5-seat, probably C class SUV G9 performance. Drove it from Beijing to Shenzhen, 1,500 miles. So it'd be like New York to Miami over 3 days. No squeaks, no rattles, no issues. I had a back massager, so we were sitting there 4 hours at a time. We stopped twice when the battery got to around 25%. No issues with range anxiety. There was always a charger there. And then multi-branded normally, and there's a swapping station, the Neo swapping station. And so experience was terrific. And we were also using level 2 plus ADAS, or intelligent driving, which is called XNGP for Xpeng. And this was all happening while Elon flies over to Beijing to try to get FSD launched. And so as we're driving, and if we're being very accurate, the currently only Jiyue, which is the Geely Baidu joint venture, has vision only. So FSD is vision only, and Jiyue is the only system. Every other system, from Neo, from Xpeng, from Li Auto, from and Baidu also has a lidar usage system. And so this is the thing. One of the issues that the current legacy have is that it's traditional automotive engineers, 80% of the company, and then 20% software developers, or at least data analytics guys and things like that. Now, talking to GUA, talking to some other companies, they're 80%. They're flopped. 80% software engineers and digital natives, and then 20% traditional automakers. And normally, a lot of those traditional automakers are on the management side, not on the. And you know, just in Silicon Valley, there are tons of product managers, okay? And products are virtual too, so it's not just a physical product. And then in traditional automotive, there's still vehicle line executives, right? And so just kind of, again, I want to push back to the culture thing, but it's a fierce, fierce, fierce war. And you're starting to see companies, these startups, not able to pay their bills. Now, that's happened in the United States, and OEMs are famous for pushing out payment terms. So that's not a unique situation to China, because a couple of media reports about having problems paying their bills. The legacies did that for a long time too. So,
and still do in some cases. So we're getting down towards the end of the show, but you in your newsletter have written about the need for the legacy automakers to what's the word I'm looking for? Not revamp themselves, but they have to change completely. Okay, so I'm going to make you in charge of a legacy OEM right now. What do you do?
Wow. So
Restructure, I think, is the word that you've used. They need to restructure to be able to compete with the Chinese.
yeah, so I would immediately bring in um, native software experience folks to actually be decision makers. So it's not just traditional automotive people across the board on management teams. I would then give them edicts that they need to cut everything in half from a timing standpoint. Because this
Barry's
is
going to love this, by the way, because he's got the tools to cut it all in half.
But this is the crazy thing, right? In my opinion, and Brett, you're following mobility because our company helps mobility companies, not just EV companies. And so this is the largest disruption globally that's ever happened in the transportation space, right? Not just the automotive space, the transportation space. And so at these legacies, at these old economy Rust Belt companies, if people aren't really feeling uneasy, you're not doing enough. I mean, at the end of the day, people should be getting fired. People, the whole department should be closed, right? Because if we believe that the Tesla retail stuff doesn't work completely, then maybe there should be a hybrid. The traditional automotives, in my opinion, have never touched the customer directly. It's always been the dealers. And so if these sales and marketing folks only talk to dealers, then how are we going to know how to interact with the customer, right? So there's whole departments that don't have the experience we need them to have. And so I would do everything all at once, basically, probably get fired, but these are the things. I'm not looking quarter to quarter. I'm looking at making these drastic changes, whether it's right sizing, whether it's making software more of a priority, whether it's making user experience and focusing directly on the customer, as opposed to, I think, traditionally in the automotive space, we focus on the product, and it should be user focused. Now, let me ask you both this. Next time you talk to a CEO of a OEM, where are the software costs? Is it part of the BOM? Is it part of the BOM? Do they address it as a bill of material cost, or is it some indirect cost? Because that'll tell you right then and there how serious they are, or if there's a decision maker high enough that says software needs to be addressed as part of the bill of material.
So let me ask you this. So you mentioned earlier that when you were at the Shanghai show, that General Motors was there, and
The Beijing show.
Okay, Beijing, sorry. And how did the Chinese people react to the vehicles that were on offer from Cadillac and on offer from Chevrolet? And how do you think if at the next Detroit show there are products from BYD or others, how the U.S. customer would react to those vehicles?
So I think the media takes it to extremes. I think most of us would consider ourselves pretty hardworking, and in order to gain my dollar, I'd want the best product, period, right? The best vehicle that I could afford, okay? And if that's currently coming from China, especially if it's built domestically, why wouldn't I want that? Because, and this is where I'm torn, and I'm sure you both feel a little bit, the four of us feel a little bit of the same way, because my dad's 27 and a half years at GM. My sister retired from GM. Her husband retired from GM. But if they're not able to keep up, and I have to pay a U.S. premium for something that I know not to be globally competitive, I'm not going to feel very good about that either, right? And 100% tariff almost guarantees that some of the product that we're going to see in the next 5 years is not going to be globally competitive. And so that's how I square that circle. I'm straddling a little bit. So
No, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, clearly the legacies have got to change. I'm interested in Carlos Tavares's solution, which is run to the Chinese and just get it from them. I don't think that helps Stellantis. Short term, yes. But it's, he's against tariffs. He changed his mind because now he's got a Chinese partner. Elon changed his mind. Of course, he's trying to get the Chinese to say yes to
Yep.
FSD in China. So, of course, he's going to say tariffs are bad and from the U.S. But to me, is you better your company better learn to compete. And outsourcing stuff to the Chinese to do is not the solution.
John, 20, 30, 40 years ago now, MIT wrote The Machine to Change the World. And it was a handbook on how to do this new thing, lean manufacturing, the Toyota production system. Literally, for a generation or two of engineers and folks, it told them how to redo the process. What is that handbook right now in this one?
That's a great.
I look around,
great.
I think, where is that? Who's written that?
Brett, that's
Gary, get out
brilliant.
there. And who, because there are so many different takes on this. And there are so many different variables that I just don't see that handbook.
No, that's an excellent point, because the machine that changed the world was really all about the Toyota production system. It was all a manufacturing solution. Whereas now what we're talking about, it's design, it's engineering, it's manufacturing, it's sales, it's purchasing, it's finance, it's on it. Everything's got to change.
Lean manufacturing included, lean design included, but yes,
Correct.
it was the
Correct.
process.
I might say 0 to 1, Peter Thiel's book, because it's startup manual. And to Barry's point, like, these startups don't have the legacy to unlearn and unburden themselves with. That's the constraint that the legacies do have. And the Europeans took the practical route. We're going to partner. US3, after January 2025, maybe it's not as politically radioactive, but GM already sells sub $10,000 US vehicles in China, with their Wuling brand and their Baojun brand. So does it make sense for them to rebadge them as Chevys, as these are unique? Because we talked about this offline. These OEMs are really in survival mode, at least. Because if I'm Bluma, who's wearing two hats, the Porsche CEO and the Volkswagen Group, if he has a decision, and I'm kind of making this extreme, but if he can only save one brand, Porsche or Volkswagen brand in China, who does he save? Because Arnaud, who's the CFO, global CFO, he's like value over value. Okay, but they're not getting that value anymore, especially because Porsche drives a lot of their sales and their profits, and Volkswagen brand offered them flexibility because of the volume, and they're losing both now in China. So
is this because the Chinese people are saying China for China? That, as the Europeans for many years would buy European cars because they were built in Europe and therefore they knew they were better. Are Chinese people now saying, you know what, we're going to buy domestic brands because we know they're every bit as good as, if not better than, brands that are coming from Europe?
Well, I'm taking your China for China a little bit differently. I think there's a large portion of Chinese consumers that just want the coolest thing. It used to be Tesla 3 years ago. If they would have come out with a Model 2, 3 years ago, it would have sold. They would have had to double capacity at Shanghai Giga to over 2 million units. And so I do believe that if GM was to come out with a cool car, there'd be a good, and again, a small portion in China is most vehicles or most countries' entire markets. And so, there is a portion, especially when there's nationalism involved and the politics involved with the U.S. and China. There's always going to be that type of, but that happens here now. And so, but at the end of the day, it's still a Chinese consumer who makes a lot less than the average American. That it still needs to, and they're driving farther because there's traffic jams in these big cities and stuff like that. Not because, just like Texas, I was told, is 5 different states. These tier 1 cities are a lot different than the lower tier cities in China. And so once you get that level of penetration, then you start to get into a little bit more of, okay, the traditional competitiveness of brands and products and stuff like that. But there's still a huge opportunity in China for the foreign automakers to kind of, if they can bottom out and then get products that people want, I think there's still an opportunity for them.
That'll be fascinating to watch. We're going to have to wrap it up. Too great having you on the show as always.
Thanks
This
again,
is really
John.
great insight. Brett, love having you back in the studio
Always
with
good to be
us.
here. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And Gary, you and I will keep on doing it.
We'll do it next week.
Thanks for having tuned in, folks.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.